Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. What a fantastic first weekend of the 2021 Overwatch League season. Oh boy, we were given some treats, some incredible matches this weekend. So let's dive in, let's talk about some of these matches, show you how I did on my predictions, and then I'll go over some of the games that I think were the most interesting and some of the better games that we saw on the weekend. So here you can see my overall and big pick records for the week. 9-5 overall, but 2-0 on my big picks. So not too bad. I thought it was really interesting. I was going through the Overwatch League pick'ems, and they had the Florida-Atlanta game as one of the double point matches. So I guess I was right. That was a pretty big game. They also had the Fusion Defiant game, one of the ones I mentioned, but did not actually pick. So I'm going to go over some of the games in general. I'll kind of run through a bunch of these games really quickly, but there's some I want to go into in a little more detail, so let's do that. So let's start with Friday. Houston Outlaws with a win over the Dallas Fuel. A pretty close match, a 3-2 victory for the Outlaws, but ultimately they came away with the win there. The Fuel looked pretty good, despite the fact they did not have a hit scan player. So all in all, pretty good series from them, but the Outlaws looked pretty well put together. They seemed very comfortable. They looked very good. Happy has been just incredible, and I'll talk more about Happy in a little bit, but what an incredible series from the Outlaws and the Fuel. Great way to start. Went the way of the Outlaws in the end. Really big credit to what that team did in the offseason. From new coaches, new players. Chengdu and Piggy really impressed me this weekend, so definitely a lot of credit to go that way. Big win for the Outlaws there. Good way to start the season for them. Moving on to the Gladiators against the Shock. This one, not quite as good as I anticipated it would be. The Shock looked very good, as they have done pretty much all season, and last season, and the season before that. So it was good to see the way they kind of meshed. I thought that the team looked like they came together pretty well. FD God looked really good. Nero looked very good. Glister didn't play a ton in this first series, but he did play a little bit. He looked pretty good as well. So Violet pulled out some DPS play on this team. So a really interesting team look for this team. I think the Shock are going through a lot of changes, and I think they're a team that has still looked very good. So while I think the Gladiators were a bit of a disappointment for this go around, I do think overall some really good looks from the Shock. I think that they proved that they are still a very good team. But I don't want to talk too much about the Shock because I want to talk about them, their second match when we get there. So that's it for Friday. We went to Saturday with the APAC games. I was pretty impressed actually by the kind of level of play we saw from APAC, even from the lower level teams. Guangzhou managed to take a draw against Shanghai in the first match on Saturday. It was a 3-0 win for Shanghai, but it was a 4-map series. I thought Choi Zae-won looked really good. I thought Shanghai had its moments where they looked really good as always, but I thought there were moments where Choi Zae-won looked like he was the one taking control of the fights, taking control of some of the matchup with Fleta primarily, and so that gives me a ton of confidence. I thought Michaeli looked okay. I don't think he looked incredible. He had some decent plays, but I really thought Choi Zae-won looked good. And I thought that Kariv looked pretty good. Someone who, has had his ups and downs in the past. I was a little skeptical of how he'd be this season, but I do think Kariv looked very good this year, or in this matchup. And so that's something I want to shout out as well. The Dragons, Fate looked pretty good. They have managed to work him into the roster pretty well. So all in all, a good win for the Dragons, but the Charge looked better than I expected. A team that very much looked better than I expected was the LA Valiant. Good matchup for them with the Hunters. It was a 3-1 win for the Hunters, so not great for the Valiant, but I actually think the Valiant showed some promise. I actually thought Melanrin looked pretty solid, and I thought Crystal looked very good. There were some moments where things were not as good for the Valiant. I think that they struggled a lot with the support line. Wuya, which I learned that it's pronounced Wuya, is looking okay, but I think he's not looking the best. One of the things I very much noticed was this team has run pretty much exclusively Brig. I do know there was at least one point they ran Lucio. I didn't pay as much attention to what the exact composition was for the second game, throughout the series. But Hybe did play some Lucio in the first match, but I think for the most part he's played a lot of Brig. Now Brig has been used on a number of different teams and a number of different compositions, and if that's what works for them, obviously it's what you're going to run, because we've seen a lot of different teams run somewhat different compositions, but that's a little concerning if the thing you have to run basically is Brig. But I think if they actually were to somehow get a main support on this team, based on what we know from the actual treatment of this team from the upper end of this organization, if they can manage to get a good a true main support on this team, I actually think this Valiant team has a chance to be pretty good. In a region that is very competitive, this Valiant team is going to win a game. I feel very confident in that. They looked good enough against the Hunters and the Fusion to the point where I think they are going to win a game at some point here in the future. The Hunters looked very good. I thought that they looked pretty solid. They seemed to have a pretty solid rotation in. Gaga played every map they played this weekend. Did not get subbed out. Elsa played every map. The only subbing we saw was in the DPS line. We saw Leave stay in. We saw Jinmu and Jimmy split some time. So that gives me a ton of faith in this Hunters team. If they have a roster and a lineup that they feel confident in and comfortable with, I feel very, very good about this Hunters team going forward. And that was one of my biggest concerns, was that if they were trying to switch a bunch of their players around and never really stay together, I would have been kind of concerned. But it is something that it looks like they kind of figured out. So I give them a lot of credit for that. The big pick that I had wrong, or it's not a big pick, but the first game that I got wrong for the week was the Philadelphia Fusion against the Seoul Dynasty. If the Philadelphia Fusion look this good with a roster that they kind of threw together in 2 weeks or whatever, this Fusion team is going to be really, really good. I think I underestimated this Fusion team. Now, they have not had to play the Dragons yet, right? They played against the Dynasty, and then they played against the Valiant, so Dynasty had some good moments. I don't know if the Dynasty have reached their peak yet. I think they still have a little bit of ways to go before they get there, but the Fusion looked very good. I think Mono and Hotba are the thing I'm going to keep looking out for in the future, how those two work together when they did not look very good together last year in New York. Is that going to change with a new kind of style of play? But Carpe and Rascal together are just fragging. I mean, the two of them are just... It is absurd how good those two are. I have a feeling that when Poco and EQO and Shockwave and Funny Astro come over, we're going to see Funny Astro play. We're going to see Poco play. I don't know if we're going to see much play out of Shockwave and EQO, because Carpe and Rascal together look really, really good. And I don't know if I would want to take those two out very often, unless it's like double hit scan and you want not Funny Astro. You want Shockwave in, because I think those two looked incredible together. The Dynasty still have some growing to do. I think Marvel needs to get more playtime. Gesture is very good on the Winston, and I think when they run the Winston comps, they look really good. But I think that the key to success for the Seoul Dynasty is to let Marvel have more playtime on that main tank role, because I think he's just more consistent and more reliable. But we'll see what happens over time and see how they kind of go about doing that. The next series, moving to North America, was the Toronto Defiant over the Vancouver Titans. 1 map win for the Titans in this one. It was a map where the Defiant subbed out 3 players. They put in Beast, they put in Logix, they put in Aztac. That's his name. Couldn't remember his name for a second there. They put in Aztac. And it was, the Titans beat them on that 1 map, right? The rest was their main lineup of Sato Michelle, Hisu, Neist, and then Lastro with Ansun J. And I think the Defiant looked pretty good, and I'll talk about them more when we get to their game against the Reign. But I actually think that the Defiant have shown a lot. I think they definitely have some limitations, and I think they need more flexibility in their DPS line. I don't want to say that the big reason why they lost is because they haven't been able to work in Logics or Beast or anything like that. Right? When you say about 3 of your starters, you're gonna run into some issues, especially when you play against a Titans team that just has a very solid core where the only subs they're making are DPS. They're gonna occasionally sub in Teru and Dalton and Linkser. They're gonna sub between the 3. I will say I was quite impressed and happy with the way the Titans were using all 3 of their DPS players. It's something that I think a lot of teams struggle with, is finding the balance for your 3 DPS players. Sometimes you'll see the Titans, or not the Titans, you'll see other teams that have 3 DPS players, have 2 DPS players that they always play, and they never sub in their second or their third DPS. Well, sometimes that's not good because you don't have the same level of flexibility with those 2 that you would have if you had all 3. So I like what the Defiant did against the Titans, but I think the Titans have actually shown to be pretty good. This Titans team is significantly better than they were last season. They are going to win games. They are going to come into matches where you think they might be the underdogs. They might not have a chance to win. And they're going to steal some maps off some good teams, and they might steal some games away from some good teams. Certain metas, they're going to be pretty good. I thought Fried Wiener looked very good. I think he looked like one of the best parts of this team. Pretty consistently the best part of this team. I think Teru also looks very good. So there's some promise for this Titans team. They are not going to be world beaters, but there is some promise for this roster. Moving on to my second big pick for the week, I had the Florida Mayhem beating the Atlanta Reign. That happened. It was a 3-1 win. One of the weirdest maps I've ever seen in Overwatch was at Eichenwald, where the Mayhem did not play defense, basically. I thought the Reign looked fine. They looked pretty good. There's certain compositions they look very good at. Rush is definitely their bread and butter, but they don't look as good when they run other stuff, and that was a big problem for them on Sunday. I still have a lot of concerns about this Mayhem team. They are a team that is very talented. They are significantly more talented than they were last season. You can make the argument maybe that they have a downgrade on the talent side going from Fate to OG, which I think is I think I would agree with that argument. I think OG is very talented on the Winston especially. His Winston is incredible, and there's nothing like OG on Winston, but there were a lot of moments when I was watching this team play, both on Saturday and Sunday, where they just do not look super coordinated, and they look rusty, and they do something that makes you confused. There was one moment on Sunday where BQB went for a flashbang onto somebody on the other team. I don't remember who exactly. Went for the flashbang, was going to go for the headshot, and then Gargoyle went for the accretion on the player. And what ends up happening is he knocks the guy back into the immortality field, he gets up, and then he kills BQB. It's stuff like that where they just don't seem to be on the same level of communication still. It was a problem I had with this team last season. They had a huge problem last season with C9s and, not getting onto the point when they should, and they could, and they had time to do so. They had problems with the way that they would do certain things. I think Gargoyle was one of the big problems in that regard when it came to mistiming accretions and stuff like that. It's things you can work on. They need to keep working on these things because they don't look perfect, but they have a very talented roster that they have the talent to get there. They just need to work on perfecting their team play and making themselves look better overall. But I am very impressed with the way this team plays. I think they are going to be a very good team. They had a very good week. I'll talk more about that, though, when I get to the Sunday matchups. But overall, this was a good game. Like I said, Eichenwald is a weird one. The Reign looked very good. And it's those things with the Reign where they show some signs of promise, but they have some work they need to do, I think, before they're really, really good and really kind of ready to compete with some of these top teams. Final match on Saturday. Dallas Fuel beat down on the LA Gladiators. It was not even that close. The Gladiators looked unprepared. This one was a surprise to me. I thought the Gladiators looked very good. If you saw my thumbnail, you know I have them kind of as like the team that my opinion of has gone down. I've seen a lot of people going out on Twitter and saying, like, this is proof the Gladiators are not a good team. Anybody who made me put them number 2 is crazy. Let's take a step back for a second. It's been one weekend of play. One of the best players in the Gladiators is playing from another continent. Kevster is not with the team right now. Let's calm down a bit. This team I never thought was going to be the best team from day one. I thought they would beat the Fuel. I thought they were better than the Fuel. I thought that the Fuel would be having some difficulties, but the Fuel know what they are. And the Fuel look good when they can run those compositions that focus around Doomfist, that focus around the Sombra, because that's what their DPS can play right now. And so I do think that the Fuel can play weird Overwatch that other teams aren't expecting. Jake, in his post-game interview on Sunday, basically said, hey, this game against the Shock was very different than the game against the Fuel, because the Fuel run weird compositions. They're not running stuff that other people are running. It's the same thing that was happening with Chengdu in 2019. No one wanted to scrim Chengdu because Chengdu wasn't going to teach you anything because it didn't run what other people were running. So when everyone's running the meta and the Fuel are coming out on different compositions, it's hard to beat them. The Outlaws looked lost against the Fuel. The Gladiators looked lost against the Fuel. The Fuel have a composition that works very well. Over time, it's going to start falling apart and crumbling. And it's not going to be as successful when everyone else kind of knows what it is that you do now. But right now, when no one knows what to expect, it's going to be very good. I will say, Sparkle's Tracer I thought was actually very good. I did not think he was going to be that good on Tracer, but wow, he impressed me a lot with his Tracer play. And I think that that's a big sign, a positive sign that they should, I think, still get a hit scan player that can excel in that Tracer role, because ideally, if you run into a Tracer Genji dive meta, you don't want to have Doha play your Tracer. You want Sparkle in your Genji, and you want someone who's really good. So someone like I've said in the past, like a Nene or like a Sigma, the NA Contenders player, to play that Tracer role. But props to the Fuel. They know it works for them. They're going to keep running that until they basically have to get a hit scan player. And so from what we've seen from them, I think they've actually looked pretty good. So Fuel are a good team. Definitely a team to keep your eye out on because they are pretty solid. They have some weaknesses, but they know it works for them, and they're going to keep running it for the foreseeable future. And I think they're going to be a scary team to deal with as a result. Moving on to Sunday, the APAC region was straight sweep after sweep after sweep. Seoul Dynasty swept the Guangzhou Charge. Profit looked really good. Gesture had a good game. Guangzhou Charge had some problems. They are a good team. Like I said, Choice I1 looked good in this series as well. Kariv looked good in this series as well, but they just got outmatched. The Dynasty just kind of beat them at... they just outplayed them in a lot of cases. I mean, there were times where Choice I1 definitely had the advantage, and he was doing a lot against 2U, but the Dynasty just looked better. The Charge, I think, have a lot of room to go, a lot of room to grow, and a lot of distance to cover before they are kind of really at their peak. But I do actually think that they've shown a lot of potential, and their DPS in particular are really good. So if you're watching the Guangzhou Charge, they are the two players to watch out for. Choice A1 and Kaylee. I thought Kaylee looked better in this match than he did in the match against the Dragons. But Choice A1 looked good in both, and he's definitely the player to watch on this Guangzhou Charge team. But good enough for the Dynasty. I think they looked pretty good, and I'm excited to see what happens going forward for both these teams. The big upset in APAC for the weekend, of course, was the Chengdu Hunters getting the 3-0 victory over the Shanghai Dragons. It was a 3-0 victory in 4 maps, I believe. I could be wrong. It could have been in 3. I'm already forgetting. But it was a 3-0 victory for the Chengdu Hunters. And it was a good win. Now, I don't think this is like the end-all be-all. A lot of people on Twitter were going out and being like, oh my god, this is crazy. It's really not. Shanghai did the exact same thing last year. They came out dominant, 3-0 victory over the Guangzhou Charge. The next day, they lose 3-0 to the Chengdu Hunters. The Chengdu Hunters just match up well, I think, against the Dragons. The Chengdu Hunters are not the same kind of orderly team that I think Shanghai matches up better against. And I think that what really is the tell is how the Dragons bounce back from this. I think Chengdu look really good. I thought Leave had a great weekend. He was incredible. And I think that Gaga had a very good weekend. But really, the standout player for the Hunters all weekend was Leave. He just looked very good. They knew what to do. They kind of knew how to play around each other. Shout out to Monk as well. I know there was a lot of discussion I saw recently about how everyone was like, oh, Faraway 1987 is so good on this team. I knew the second I signed Monk that he was going to be the guy they played. You don't sign a flex support that late into the offseason with the anticipation or the expectation to not play them. Atlanta did it with Dogman. I knew that Chengdu was going to do it here with Monk, and I thought he actually looked pretty good. He played decently well. I don't think he's the same kind of like flashy player we saw with Molly last season, but it's early. I think it took Molly a little while to get kind of recognized for how good he was, but I think this is a solid team. Definitely one to keep your eye out on. They are going into the second week of the APAC region with one of the best records. They're tied for first with the Fusion, so they are a team to keep your eye out for. Dragons will bounce back from this. This doesn't define them. They're going to be just fine. But very interesting match between these two. Fusion took on the LA Valiant. This was a non-contest. Fusion dominated this match. There were a couple times where you were like, oh, the Valiant look competent, mildly. Crystal still, I think, looked pretty good. He is by far the best player in this Valiant team. I think that there are moments where the Valiant look like they have some stuff together, but ultimately they're struggling a lot, and they don't have everything that they want to have together, and so I think that's one of the problems that they're going to keep running into. Fusion look very good, though. They're the team that I think will probably end up being the team to beat coming into this first tournament. The Dragons, I think, definitely are still a great team, but the Fusion right now look really good, even with the players they have that are not necessarily the best. And I'd be pretty convinced in this Fusion team right now is kind of the team to beat in APAC, just based on what we saw from them. Moving into North America, we had one of the greatest Overwatch League matches of all time take place Sunday between the Houston Outlaws and the San Francisco Shock. If you can watch one match of the season, if someone came up to you with a gun and put it to your head and said, you need to show me the best Overwatch League match of the 2021 season, and this is even like I'm talking like September from this point, right? October, right? Season's over, and someone does that, you can pull this game up. The chances of many games beating this game are minimal. This game was incredible. The Houston Outlaws get the huge upset victory over the San Francisco Shock. 3-2 in 6 maps, stopping the Shock's reverse sweep. This series had everything you wanted. And when I said before that I was going to talk about Happy was on another level in this series. I made a couple tweets about how good Happy was. I think I tweeted more about Happy this weekend than any other games combined. Happy was unreal all weekend. But against the Shock, Happy had an MVP caliber performance. The first map, he was doing so much damage. Deadeye was basically on cooldown. He had it multiple times. He would have it every single fight without fail, sometimes multiple in prolonged fights. His Hanzo was incredible. His McCree was incredible. Happy was a carry player in this series. And I don't want this to seem like one of those things where it was like a gargantuan effort where Happy carried this team on his back. He was really good. He had a carry performance. But Jonggu had an amazing series, and Piggy played really well. Jake came in and played Brig for this team. The Outlaws look great. And they don't look great on just like 1 or 2 compositions. They had multiple compositions, multiple different setups that they ran, and they looked really good on all of them. This is an Outlaws team that I said at the beginning of the season, right, in my predictions video, that I probably put them too low in the power rankings. The answer to that question is I 100% put them too low in the power rankings. This Outlaws team is legit. The Shock looked good. The Shock did not play poorly. The Shock played pretty well. But you can tell that this Outlaws team is a different Outlaws team than we have ever seen before. Go watch this match, do yourself a favor, and just soak in how good this match was from the Outlaws, from the Shock. Havana was nuts, and it was quite possibly the greatest possible ending to that series. Please go watch it if you did not watch it. If you did watch it, you know why it's great. We all saw it. It was amazing. Moving on to the Mayhem versus the Titans. Once again, like I said earlier, Mayhem win. They look good. It was a 3-1 victory for them. I still have problems with them in terms of the way that they play. They definitely have some work to do for their teamwork, but overall, very solid win for them. A lot of credit where credit is due for the Mayhem. They've leveled up. Slime looks very good. I think they have a lot of very strong foundations there to build up on and kind of to work on. I think OG looks pretty good. He's had some moments that I'm not as keen on, and he hasn't looked incredible, but overall, he's looked pretty good, so not much to say there. Same thing can be said about the Mayhem and Titans in this game from the previous ones. Titans have some moments that look pretty good. They certainly will beat some teams, but they lack superstar power, and so in a lot of those fights, it's really kind of comes down to they have to have the superior teamwork, and if they don't have the superior teamwork, they're not going to be able to get many wins. But they do have the potential to definitely get some big upsets. Fun match of the week was one of the ones I said would probably be pretty good. Had it not been for the Shock Outlaws game, it probably would have been the game of the day on Sunday. Well, the NA game of the day. The Chengdu Shanghai game was also very, very good. But it was a reverse sweep for the Toronto Defiant. They managed to pull off the victory. The Reign are very good at Rush. And that's kind of where things turned towards the Defiant's favor when the series went a bit more away from Rush. I was think the Defiant just kind of found their footing as the series progressed. They started to look better. Lasher had a great series. Nace is a very interesting player. I still think he's got some room to grow, and he's got a lot to show. But I think that Nace actually looked pretty decent throughout the series, and throughout the weekend. He's actually been pretty good so far in a way that I didn't really expect him to be. But this is an interesting series. It's difficult because I think that Atlanta has some issues specifically with the way they have looked running non-rush compositions, and it's certainly their biggest problem. They need to get better running rush, or non-rush compositions. But I think that their overall level of play has looked significantly better than what it did last season. I think Gators looked better on some heroes he never really played last season at a high level. This DPS trio is very, very good, and I think that they have a lot of potential. There's not really anybody that is, like Masa, for example, is someone who I think a lot of people are kind of down on. Masa looked really good. I think Iris looked really good. So to me, it just comes down to the tank line, right? The tank line has to show that they can succeed and perform at a high level if they're not running rush. That is the one thing they need to show. This tank line is the one thing that will potentially hold this roster back. That's what we need to see more of from them. This is a tough weekend for them to go down the way they did to the Mayhem, and then to lose in reverse sweep fashion to the Toronto Defiant. It's painful for them, but they can grow from here, and I think that they will learn a lot more from this. I think they're probably not as good as where I maybe had thought they were, but they certainly are still a team to look out for and a team to be afraid of. So that's all I have for today. This is going to be a little bit longer than I would have liked it to be, so I'll try to get a little better at shortening this for next week. But let me know your thoughts on this past weekend of Overwatch League in the comments down below. It feels great for the Overwatch League to be back. I love it. Great times for it to be back. That's all from me, though, for today. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing, but I'm going to get out of here. Thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.